Everything you need to know about To Kill a Mockingbird, chapter 23. So now that we're through chapter 23, we can talk through it. This is a dialogue-heavy chapter without much in the way of action, but the chapter helps us work through the pretty heavy events in the last few chapters. All Atticus will say about Bob Ewell is that he wished he didn't chew tobacco. Gross, since he spit in his face, right? Miss Stephanie had plenty to say, claiming to have seen it all. Apparently, Bob Ewell came up, spit in Atticus's face, cussed him out, and threatened him. Atticus's reaction was to get out his handkerchief, wipe off his face, and stand there calmly until Ewell finally asked him if he was too proud to fight, calling him an N-word lover. Atticus just told him no, too old, and walked on by. Later, Jem and Scout recommend to Atticus that he should carry a gun, but he tells them that that's ridiculous. Dill suggests they try to guilt him into it, that if Bob Ewell killed Atticus, then Jem and Scout would starve. The children are scared and mope around until Atticus asks them what's the matter. Jem tells him Bob Ewell is the problem, and they think Atticus should do something, that when someone says that they're going to get you, they mean it. So in typical Atticus fashion, though, he tells them to put themselves in Bob Ewell's shoes. Basically, the whole county knows that he lied and beat up his daughter. He looks like a bigger fool than he already did. So in Atticus's mind, if Bob spitting in his face means that Mayella may get beat less, then he's fine with that. He concludes that they don't have to worry. Aunt Alexandra comes in saying she's not so sure, but Atticus dismisses her. The kids stop worrying about it and enjoy the summer. Atticus told the kids that Tom was awaiting for an appeal and was in a jail 70 miles away and his family couldn't see him. If he loses the appeal, Atticus tells Jem and Scout he'd go to the chair unless the governor stopped it, but they didn't need to worry yet. Jem and Atticus talk about rape mandating the death penalty in Alabama, but Atticus says he's fine with the punishment, but that it needs to be more than circumstantial evidence. Jem concludes that they should do away with juries then. Well, Atticus tells Jem that if he and 11 other boys like Jem were on the jury, then Tom would be free, but that something came between the men on the jury and their ability to reason, because racism isn't reasonable. Atticus concludes that in their courts at this time, that when it's a white man's word against a black man's, then the white man will win. That is disgusting, but those are the sad facts at this point. Atticus gets stronger in his words, telling Jem that the older he gets, the more he will see it, and that any white man who cheats or takes advantage of a black man is trash. He says that it's all adding up, and one day there will be a bill to pay for it. Jem asks why more people like Atticus and Miss Maudie can't serve on juries. Atticus tells them that women aren't allowed to. So a side fact is that in 1942, women could serve on juries in only 28 states, and it wasn't until 1973 that women could serve in all states. He says that town and business people avoid serving on juries out of concern of it biasing people against their business if the verdict wasn't liked. So there ends up being a lot of country people on juries. Jem says that the jury made up their mind in a hurry, but Atticus tells him that wasn't the case and reveals that it took them several hours, particularly because a Cunningham at first was wanting to totally acquit Tom, but was slowly worn down by others on the jury. It gave Atticus a flicker of hope that things might be changing. Jem is shocked, but on a hunch, Atticus allowed one of the men that had been to the jail the night before to stay on the jury, believing there's not much difference between two men that are going to vote guilty, whether they were at the jail or not. So that it wasn't that risky, but that this man was an unknown because of what had happened at the jail. And it worked to an extent in Atticus's favor. He thought that a lot of respect was gained from what the Atticus had done that night at the jail. When Atticus leaves the room to go to bed, Scout concludes that she'd like to have Walter Cunningham over, which starts a back and forth with Aunt Alexandra. Bottom line, Aunt Alexandra tells Scout that Walter is trash and that Scout can't even play with him. Before the situation explodes and Scout says something she'll regret, Jem leads her out of the room where Scout is crying in anger. Jem feels bad, so he offers her a Tootsie Roll in his room and shows her how he's growing a chest hair. Scout pretends she can see it and says, "That's really nice, Jem." Jem tells her that Aunt Alexandra isn't used to girls and is trying to make Scout more of a lady. Scout says she knows Aunt Alexandra doesn't like her, and that's fine, but she was upset about what Aunt Alexandra had said about Walter, that she doesn't think he's trash. The two have a discussion about types of people. Jem thinks there are 4 types of people who don't much like each other. Jem says that their aunt has chosen to think their family has a distinction somehow connected not only to how far back they can trace their lineage, but also somehow connected to how educated they have been and for how long. He says that Atticus says that really one family is as old as another. Scout, because she sees that Atticus likes some of the same things that the Cunninghams do, isn't really following what Jem means, and she thinks there's just one kind of people. Jem's a little frustrated, but concludes that there's more than one kind of person or they'd get along better. He feels he more understands why Boo might stay inside, because Boo wants to stay inside, meaning that he doesn't want to deal with the ugliness of society and some of the people in it. So what are we supposed to get out of this chapter? This chapter serves a couple different functions. For one, we see Atticus's compassion and integrity is still strong after coming through the trial. Even when verbally attacked and spit on by Bob Ewell, he still tries to see where Ewell is coming from and why he might be motivated to confront Atticus. Atticus nobly hopes that if Bob is venting his frustration at him, then perhaps Mayella is not getting abused. The chapter also confronts racism through Jem's conversation with Atticus. Atticus talks plainly about the ugly truth. Even in a court of law, the ridiculousness of racism interferes with a person's ability to think clearly. Atticus makes a blunt statement that someone who is actively taking part in elevating one race over another is trash. In the conversation with Aunt Alexandra and Scout, the idea is taken even further. To elevate one's family or self based on family or background is also nonsensical. It's another example of false or hateful distinctions between people in order to elevate one status over another. Any questions? Drop them in the comment box below.